Hello there. Good morning to you all, or perhaps it's a good afternoon or good evening, wherever you are in the world. We will get started with the webinar very shortly, but first, just a very quick tech check. If you can see and hear me okay, if you could please use the raise hand icon or one of the emojis to let us know, that would be great. Lovely, loads of hands going up there. That's great, thank you very much. You can put those down again now. Just a teeny tiny bit of housekeeping before we get started. If you do have any tech issues during the webinar, please drop a question into the Q&A box or raise your hand and I will endeavour to come and help you. We will have time for Q&A throughout as well, but just to let you know, we will be only answering questions relating to the topic today, so please do bear that in mind. But without further ado, I'll now hand over to Victoria to introduce today's session and herself and join you all again for the questions. Thank you very much.
Great, thanks, Kat. And welcome everyone to the first session of our year-long training program, the Research Communications Lab. So my name is Victoria Babbitt, and I am the Director of Community Development at Taylor & Francis. I've been working in publishing for close to 18 years, and before that, I was a researcher in the field of geography, focusing on migration. And today I am joining you from a very cold and snowy Stockholm, Sweden. So just a little bit of an overview. The Research Communication Lab has been developed to support researchers in their efforts to publish their research findings. And we will have 11 sessions this year that will run monthly. And we're running these sessions twice a day to ensure that everyone who'd like to join is able to do so. We're also going to be creating videos of the content that you can access on our website if you're unable to join. And we're going to kind of make those into like bite-sized bits so you can just dip in and watch a little bit and then come back later if you're interested. So we're covering all aspects of the publishing process, and I'll show you the schedule in just a moment. The sessions are going to be led by TNF experts in each area. And the sessions are designed to be interactive and to give you the opportunity to apply what you're learning during the sessions. And for those of you that complete all of the sessions, we will be offering a final kind of exam and a certificate of completion, along with the certificates of attendance that you get when you attend a live session. So here's the schedule of the workshops. So today we're kicking off with fundamentals of publishing. And then next month, we will be focusing on choosing quality journals for your work. In March, we will have the first of 2 ethics workshops. The first one will be more of a theory session, with the second one in April being more of a application. So it'll be featuring case studies and other activities for you to kind of test your knowledge and really kind of develop a deep understanding of some of the ethical concerns and your role as a researcher in ensuring that the work that's published is of high quality and of the greatest integrity. In May, we're going to kick off our series of writing workshops. So we will have 3 different workshops, one for medicine and health, one for science and technology, and one for the humanities and social science. Each workshop will be split into 2 days. So the one thing I want to highlight is for the humanities and social science session, that one's going to focus on theoretical papers. The other 2 will obviously be kind of looking at more quantitative papers, but that one is going to focus specifically on that. In June, we are going to have a peer reviewer training workshop, and then we're taking July off for vacation and back again in August to take a deep dive into data management and sharing. And then in September, we're going to take a look at the future of publishing with an eye on open research. In October, we have a session on how you can increase the real-world impact of your work, looking specifically at article extenders. And then in November, we'll host a workshop on creating social media strategies. And then finally in December, we will finish off with a workshop on creating successful book proposals. So it's a very full agenda for the year. But for today, we will be focusing on the nuts and bolts of publishing. Today's session will likely be the least interactive of all the sessions. And while there will be some guidance throughout, it's really focused on how publishing works. And today we're going to be using Mentimeter to run some polls. So take a moment to open up the Mentimeter in a different window on your computer so that you can easily access it when we are doing our polling. So there's the information there. The website is www.menti.com, and then they'll ask you for a code, which is 63250406. And that will bring you to the slides. Kat, do you want to put that? Actually, I'll go back. If you wouldn't mind putting that in the chat, just so that people that join later can find that. I do have this on some slides coming up, but just so it's there. So today's learning objectives are pretty clear. By the end of the session, you should have a clear idea of what to expect from the publishing process, understand the different publishing models, and understand peer review and how to successfully navigate it. So that's going to be the main focus today. And here's a general overview of the publishing process. So, obviously you begin with writing a paper, then you choose a journal, submit, go through peer review, and the production process, publication, and then sharing your work. But as said, today we're just focusing on the middle part there. So submitting your paper, peer review, production, and publication. And we will be focusing a little bit on publishing models, which would naturally fall under choosing a journal, but we are going to cover that today. And we're also going to spend some time talking about copyright and licenses, because this is an area of confusion for many researchers. So I want to make sure to cover that today. And then in subsequent sessions, as I showed you, we are going to talk about how to write an effective, what am I saying, a high quality paper, how to choose a journal, how to share your work, and various other topics. But today it's just really talking about the process itself. So let's start up with a warm-up question. And this question is, what do you think the purpose of publishing is? And there are no right answers here. I'm just kind of curious to hear your thoughts on why publishing is important. So let me just pop out of there and pop into this. And we already have some great responses here. So sharing knowledge, sharing your work. These always go so fast, it's hard to read everything. So I'll give it a second to settle down there. Sharing findings, help community, public benefit, lots on expanding knowledge, sharing innovation, educational purposes, money, let's see, exposure to your research, completing PhDs. But the main thing that most of you are focusing on here, and I'm happy to hear it, is really about sharing knowledge. We've got stuff on reputation, professional reputation, visibility, advancing science. Yeah, this is all great stuff. Getting mass feedback, I think that's really important. Showing off, that's good too. Yeah, I'm a postdoc. It's so important for career progression, obviously, to publish. That's a main reason why people must publish, benefiting others. Yeah, these are all really great. Professional reputation, changing policies. Yeah, that's great. Sharing work with peers. Wonderful. To find answers. Yeah. Career advancement. There it is. Professional development. Yeah. Fantastic. Great. Thanks for sharing your thoughts on that. Feel free to continue to put these your ideas in there. I think it continues to function. Let's see. So wonderful. All right, so let's get started. We're going to start off with talking about publishing models. And here are the most common publishing models that you're likely to come across. Today, we're focusing mainly on journals, but you will find similar models in books publishing. For instance, there are open access options for books. Either you can publish an entire book open access, or you could just publish certain chapters open access, which would be more of a hybrid model. So let's start by talking about subscription publishing, the subscription model. So the subscription model for journals emerged to support the publishing process and distribution of the journal, so the costs of the journal. And typically in the subscription publishing model, articles are published in issues. And today those issues are mainly published online as a part of an annual volume. However, previously they would have been printed in issues and distributed. And there's still some journals that do have print copies, but that is becoming less regular practice. The subscription costs fund the work of the publisher as they validate, produce, disseminate, and manage the long-term curation of published research. And increasingly, publishers are having to manage the rise of systematic manipulation. And while we used to have quite a few individual subscriptions to journals in the past, now most institutions subscribe to a large portfolio of journals rather than individual titles. As an author, there usually is not a cost for submitting or publishing in a subscription-based journal. However, there are exceptions. For instance, in the field of economics, many of the top competitive journals charge a submission fee. And I know in a lot of the agricultural journals, they used to have page charges, although I think those are going away. Lastly, in most cases, authors transfer the copyright of their work to the publisher or the owner of the journal when you're publishing in a subscription-based journal. Now, the open access model of publishing emerged with the rise of the internet as a reaction to the high cost of subscriptions, though the concept can be traced back to the 1960s. Researchers and librarians advocated to an opening up of the research findings, arguing that publicly supported research should be accessible to all. Since then, open access has become the dominant publishing model, as you can see on this chart, which I produced through Dimensions yesterday. You can see a couple real bumps there, you know, a consistent rise throughout the 2010s, but then you'd start to see a big jump around 2019, and that's around the time that we really started to see a rise in hybrid open access. So let's quickly go over some of the key elements of open access for those of you that might be a little bit unfamiliar with it. So there are two essential elements to open access. One is about making content freely available to anyone, anywhere in the world in a digital format. And then the second part is about making content reusable by third parties after publication. So we'll explore both of those elements throughout this session. These are the main types of open access models you're likely to hear about. And I'll go over these in a moment, but just to note, platinum and diamond open access, those terms are used interchangeably to describe the same model. And bronze open access isn't really fully open access model. It's when publishers make articles accessible. Often it's for marketing purposes or maybe to celebrate an anniversary for a journal or something like that. But those articles don't have the relevant licenses, which we'll discuss in a bit. And before we dig into the models, I wanted to briefly discuss the different versions of an article. One key difference between publishing open access and publishing in a subscription journal is how you and others can use your work after publication. So when you publish your work open access, you're able to share the final published version of your work without any restrictions. However, if you don't publish your work open access, there will likely be some restrictions on how and when you can share different versions of your paper. You, as the author, holds the copyright to your work, but in most cases, when you don't publish open access, you'll need to transfer copyright to the publisher or society who owns the journal, and they will in turn host, distribute, and protect your work. Transfer of copyright can produce some restrictions on post-publication use and sharing of articles. So with this in mind, it's important to understand the significance of each of these versions of the paper. So the first is called the author's original version, and sometimes it's called preprint. Those terms are used interchangeably. And this version is the version that you submit to the journal for peer review. And authors may post this version anywhere. Next, we have the accepted manuscript or the postprint, and this version has gone through a peer review process and has been accepted. However, it hasn't been copy-edited or typeset. Authors are able to post this version immediately on their personal websites or share via Facebook or LinkedIn. But if the article is published in a subscription-based journal, authors must wait until after an embargo period to archive the article in repository. Now, if the journal is an open access journal, authors may post this version immediately. And then lastly, we have the version of record. And this is the final version of the article. And this version is maintained by the publisher and is updated with relevant information. And this version may not be posted online if you published in a subscription-based journal. So this brings us to the first model of open access, and that is green open access. And it does refer to sharing articles published in subscription-based journals. So green open access essentially involves either archiving an earlier version of your paper, again, not that final version of record, in an institutional repository, or posting an early version online or in a preprint server. So just as a reminder, a couple things. If you're planning on archiving a version of your paper in a repository, you have two options. The first is to post your original manuscript, the one you submitted for peer review, in the repository. Or you can submit that accepted version. However, most subscription journals do have embargo periods for sharing that accepted version of your paper. So you'll likely have to wait to post that version in a repository. If you would like to share your work online or in a preprint server, the only version that you can post is that original manuscript you submitted for peer review. Just to be clear, green open access is about sharing an earlier version of your article that is published in a subscription-based journal and isn't really isn't published open access on that journal website. None of the other aspects of open access apply to green open access. And we're going to talk about some of those other elements. Right, so articles published in diamond or platinum open access journals are freely accessible online. So these journals are usually supported with funding from universities or other organizations. Authors may publish in these journals without paying a fee, and readers can access all of the final versions of the articles without paying a fee. And many of these journals are launched and run by scholarly societies or institutions, or sometimes research networks. And we see greater diversity in terms of languages with these journals as well. For instance, in Latin America, they have one of the highest concentration of diamond open access journals. And most of those journals are publishing articles in Spanish and Portuguese. And we see this globally, but I highlight Latin America because they were really ahead of the game when it came to open access. And then the type of open access you're likely most aware of is gold open access. So like diamond open access, gold open access means that your article will be accessible online for anyone to read, and the copyright will remain with you. Gold open access involves paying an article processing charge, or an APC, to cover the cost of publishing, which would have typically been covered by a subscription fee. There are two ways in which an author can publish open access, either in a fully open access journal or in what we call a hybrid journal. So first is fully open access journals. For fully open access journals, all of their content is accessible. The second option for publishing your work open access is to publish in what we call a hybrid journal. So hybrid open access is when an author chooses to publish open access in a journal that is subscription funded, and much of their content is not freely accessible unless you or your institution has a subscription. So these journals charge an APC to cover the processing costs for that one open access article. So those are the two kind of main models of gold open access. Now, we often receive questions about how you can fund an APC. And again, this is if you're publishing in a gold open access journal. If you have received funding for your research, often the funder will cover the cost of an open access fee, especially if they have mandated that you must publish your work open access. For fully open access journals, there are waivers or discounts to reduce the article processing charge for fully open access journals. And these are available to corresponding authors with primary affiliations based in countries defined by the World Bank as low-income economies. And they can apply for a 100% ABC waiver if they publish in a fully open access journal. Or for corresponding authors with primary affiliations based in countries defined by the World Bank as lower middle income economies. And those authors can apply for a 50% discount on a normal ABC when they publish in a fully open access journal. As we've discussed with Diamond or Platinum Open Access, these are fully funded by societies or institutions who cover the publishing costs for the articles. So authors don't have to pay an APC to publish in those types of journals. And all of this information can be found on the journal website under the instructions for authors. And I just want to remind you that some institutions have agreements with publishers to cover the cost of open access fees for articles published in hybrid open access journals, or in some cases, fully open access journals. Great. So time for another poll. So let's go back to Mentimeter here. And while you are filling out this next poll, Kat, do we have any questions?
No questions yet.
No questions yet. Good.
No.
Either everything is clear or I've completely baffled you. All right. So what is your preferred publishing model? So we have Gold Open Access, Platinum Diamond Open Access, subscription-based with Green Access, and then the subscription-based. I have to say, I thought that Platinum Diamond Open Access would be the top one there, but I think a lot of institutions do have agreements with publishers where those ABC costs are covered. So for those gold journals, that's becoming much more feasible for many researchers out there. Great, it looks like it's slowing down now. It looks like gold is the clear winner in our poll here. Wonderful. Thanks. Let's go back to the presentation. All right, so next we're going to talk about copyright and licensing. And this is an area that I've noticed a lot of researchers have, there's a lot of confusion around it, both with copyright and also with the types of licenses that open access journals use. So let's dig in. So let's start off with what is copyright. Most of you will be familiar with copyright. It's an intellectual property right that protects original works. It's granted to the creator of the work and protects the work from being stolen or reproduced without the permission of the copyright holder. For an article published in a subscription journal, as with open access articles, publishers will validate, produce, disseminate, and act as stewards in the long-term curation of the article. Publishers also might handle reuse requests. So in the subscription model, the author receives these services for free, and instead publishers recoup their investment by selling access to the content. To achieve this, the owner of the journal typically requires a transfer or assignment of the copyright in the article. So the other option is to grant the publisher or society the exclusive right to publish. So within this option, the author retains copyright, but gives a license to the publisher to publish and disseminate the work. So in the first instance, you're basically giving that copyright to the publisher or the owning society. In the second, your name will still sit with copyright, but you're transferring, you're giving permission to the publisher to manage your article. So when you assign copyright or give the exclusive right to publish, there are some constraints on how you can share your work, which we've discussed. However, authors still hold the right to the following. So they can be credited as the author of the article. They own and exercise any trademark or patent rights held by the author and addressed in the article. They can make printed copies of the article to use for lecture or class. They can include the article in a thesis or a dissertation. They can present the article at a meeting or a conference and distribute printed copies of the article on a non-commercial basis. And as discussed, they can post the author's original manuscript and accepted manuscript on departmental, personal, or institutional websites, or in institutional repositories, depending on the embargo period. So there's still a lot you can do, even if you do assign copyright. Now, when publishing open access, the author or the copyright owner, if that's different, signs an author publishing agreement in which they retain copyright and give the publisher the right to publish the version of record of the article. The agreement incorporates the Creative Commons license of the author's choice, which will dictate how what others can do with the article once it's been published. So let's take a look at the Creative Commons license. First of all, I just want to highlight some journals do not give you a choice on which type of license you can use. So it's really important that you investigate prior to submitting your article to the journal if you have any concerns. So here are the most common licenses that you're likely to see if you're publishing open access. The first one here on the screen is CC BY, and this license allows authors to use your work in any way they choose, as long as they clearly attribute the original authorship and publication. And this tends to be the most common license for fully open access journals. The next one is CC BY NC, and here an author can use your work in any manner, but they cannot profit from it. So for instance, that would mean that they wouldn't be able to include your article in a book that they were going to subsequently charge money for. Next, we have CC BY ND, and here an author cannot change your work in any way. They must use it in the original format. For instance, this would mean that they would not be able to translate your work and publish a translation. And lastly, we have CC BY SA, and this means that when people use your work, they need to attach the same license as you did originally. And of course, this is really important to be aware of when you're using other people's work. So I just want to highlight, these have a bit of a mix and match quality to them. So you could have any number of combinations. So here's just an example of some of the different combinations that you're likely to see in academic publishing. And you can see how they have different kind of different elements. And different journals will have preferences for what kind of licenses are available. So it's really important that you do look at the journal website before you submit. Now, before moving on, I just thought I would take a moment to highlight the differences between these reuse options based on the copyright options here. So you have copyright assignment on the top, you have exclusive right license to publish, then you have attribution, which is CC BY, you have the non-commercial, and then you have non-commercial, non-derivative. So these are some examples of the different licenses and what you or others are permitted to do with that. So as you can see, the first two are very similar. Great. So we are going to do another another poll based on this, because I'm just curious to hear from you about what your preference would be for copyright options. So which copyright option would you prefer? Copyright assignment, exclusive license to publish, CC BY, CC BY NC, that's non-commercial, CC BY ND, that's the non-derivative, or CC BY NC and D, so that would be the most restricted. And Kat, do we have any questions at this point while people are filling that out?
Hello, I hope my sound is loaded. It's been quite slow today. We do have a couple of questions, which are sort of quite similar, so I'll combine them. Simply, what are the advantages and limitations of publishing in open access versus subscription-based journals?
Yeah, I mean, I think the main thing that people highlight in terms of an advantage is that if you publish in open access, your work is freely accessible to anyone. You can share it. A lot of people think that if you publish open access, you're going to see higher citation rates, you're going to see higher readership. I also think that, when you publish open access, people from outside academia can easily access your work. Journalists, policymakers, the general public, and that sort of thing. So those are some real benefits. And obviously you retain copyright. The downside and the benefit of publishing in a subscription-based journal is the cost question, obviously. I will say a lot of people wonder about the quality of open access as opposed to subscription-based publications. And I really want to highlight that the editorial policies do not differ between a subscription-based journal and an open access journal. It's still going to have a robust editorial board. You're still going to see the same kind of peer review processes. The publisher is still invested in both models and is going to protect and curate and all that kind of stuff. So in terms of the process, you won't see much of a difference. It's really just about that access piece and the cost piece. I would say that's probably the two key things. Do you have anything to add, Kat? Am I missing anything there?
No, I think that was pretty comprehensive. Another question has just come in, which is it possible to just have a CC license without any kind of suffix to that? And if yes, what does that mean?
Yeah, no, you always want something. The CC is the Creative Commons license, but you always want to have that that indicator of, okay, it's CC, but what does that mean? So the most permissive is that CC BY. So that is like, people just need to, identify the original author and the original publication, but then they can do anything they want with it. So, but yeah, the CC is just Creative Commons, and then you have the indicators of what kind of use is permitted.
Perfect, thank you.
Yeah. Great. All right, wonderful. So CC BY won in our little polling here, which I guess I'm not really that surprised by. Wonderful. Let's go back to the presentation. Okay, so next we're going to talk about the submission process. And here are some of the main things that you need to think about is preparing your submission, instructions for authors, submission systems, and key statements. So I want to start off with the instructions for authors. So prior to submitting your article, it is essential that you review the instructions for authors. These are the rule books for the journals and will provide you with all the information you need about the type of peer review they use, how you should prepare your paper, i.e. what types of articles they accept, formatting requirements if there are any, word counts, all that kind of stuff will be there. There will be guidance on using third-party materials, their data sharing policies, their open access policies, and reporting requirements if that's relevant. I mean, basically all the information you need to know to have a successful submission. And I would actually suggest reviewing these before you start writing your paper if you know what journal you are you're planning on submitting to, because it might save you time later if you know if they do have formatting requirements, you can use those from the beginning and that sort of thing. So here's a bit of a checklist that you can use when preparing to submit, and many journals have checklists in their instructions for authors. So again, it's just a good idea to look at it. It's a reminder. Because sometimes it can be a bit nerve-wracking when you're submitting, so it's kind of nice to have a checklist. So here's some of the things that you probably want to think about. So do you need to share research data with your article? Increasingly, journals are requiring that your data is submitted. Do you have written permission for any third-party materials you've used? This is your responsibility. Some people think that it's the publisher's responsibility to get permissions for photos and data and that sort of thing. It's actually your responsibility, and that should be taken care of before you submit. Have you included the name and affiliation of your co-authors? Is everything current and spelled correctly? Do you have any statements that you need to include? Any disclosure statements, any competing interest statements that you need to include? And do you have the correct files ready to upload? We have seen in the past where people, upload their submission, it goes through peer review, the article's rejected, and then they look at the file and realize they submitted the wrong file. So it's really important that you take some time and make sure you have your most recent version of your paper and various elements. And then the one thing I want to just highlight here, and we'll cover this more in our ethics sessions later on in the series, but there are many, many fraudulent submitting agents and editing services out there. So if you are thinking about using a submitting agent or an editing service, do some research on them. Make sure that they are a legitimate entity, because we are seeing a lot of predatory actors out there and authors getting caught up in kind of fraudulent agent schemes and that sort of thing. So do some research before you use any service. Now, you will submit a full version of your manuscript as you would like it to appear when published. You must, however, label this not for review if you are submitting to a journal which uses double anonymous peer review. If the journal uses double anonymous peer review, then you're likely going to be submitting two different files, one in which you've removed any identifying information, so your name. If you're citing yourself, you would probably replace your name with author and that sort of thing. And then you would, and that one would be labeled, and then one that would be labeled not for review, that would include all the information. So all of this kind of guidance will be clearly detailed in the instructions for authors. So if it is practicing double anonymous peer review, you will see some guidance around how you should be submitting all your files. But this is all the material that you need to include. So article title, journal name, full name and details of the corresponding authors, full name and details of the co-authors, if you have any, your acknowledgement sections. Again, if it's double anonymous peer review, look at that acknowledgement section to make sure that there's nothing that could identify you in that. You'll need to have your abstract, keywords, and then the main text. And then separately, you'll have your figures and tables, references, and appendices. So that's everything you need to include. And then when you're ready to submit, in most cases, when you do submit, you will be submitting to an online submission system, such as Scholar1 or Editorial Manager. So to the right here, you can see the landing page for one of our Scholar1 sites. And in this example, someone has begun the submission process. And once you've submitted, you will be able to follow the progress on the site. I've also included a screenshot of our submission portal, which most of our journals use, on the left side of the screen here. And this is an intuitive, easy to use submission site linked to the Scholar1 and Editorial Manager peer review systems. And as you can see here, you'll be asked to upload files in this upload files, and in this case, either by dragging or uploading the file from your computer. And then once they're uploaded, the files automatically are transferred to the peer review system the journal uses, and then the process begins. What I would say, a little bit of guidance here, before you begin the submission process, familiarize yourself with the system the journal uses and make sure you understand what's required in terms of documents and how they should be formatted. And most publishers will have extensive guidance on their website. And you can look at our Author Services website. We have both guidance for Scholar1 manuscript systems and for the Editorial manuscript systems, manager systems. Great. So next we are going to talk about peer review. But before we talk about peer review, it's time for yet another poll. And I am curious to hear from you what you think the value of peer review is. Why is peer review important? So let's go back to our polling. This is our last poll here. And while people are putting their thoughts down, Kat, do we have any questions?
Hello again. I am answering some kind of less kind of pertinent questions to our topic today in the chat, but I will just have a scan up the list while we're waiting for the Menti. Is a kind of general one. Why does every journal ask the authors to format their references differently? In other words, why is it that we cannot submit minimally formatted manuscripts to any journal? I mean, I suppose for a lot of Taylor and Francis journals, we do have format-free submission, which you know, is intended to alleviate that burden for authors. Oh, look, my camera's finally switched on.
Yeah, I was going to say that we do have a lot of format free, but really when it comes to referencing styles, that's really comes down to disciplines. You know, every discipline has their favorite referencing style, and so that's where a lot of that comes from. But yeah, Taylor and Francis has format free submissions for most of our journals, I would think now, and I would suspect a lot of other publishers have similar similar practices, because we do realize it is such a pain to reformat your paper every time you're submitting it to a new journal. So,
Absolutely.
Yeah, these are really great answers here. Credibility, verification, validation, enhancing quality, improvement, objectivity, that's great. Accuracy, enhancing the quality, proof checking, standardization. Any other questions, Kat?
Yeah, so we have one here from Adamu, which is which OA would you recommend for an early career researcher? And another question, which is sort of, I suppose, tangentially related, which is about advice for navigating open access when you're not currently working in an organisation or attached to an institution.
Yeah. So, I mean, for the first question, it comes back down to what I was saying about the difference between open access and subscription-based journals. The process is going to be the same. So it's more important, and we're going to talk about this next month, that the most important thing is finding a journal that's actually appropriate for your work. And then you can look at the model. I mean, if you're really keen to publish open access and you have funding, then the sky's the limit. You can, you know, publish in any journal. But if you're an early career researcher without funding and your institution doesn't have a deal, then you might want to explore some other options, like with the Diamond Open Access or with subscription journals. So it really depends on kind of your positionality and what you're trying to achieve. But the most important thing is really finding a journal that is appropriate for your work, because you want the article accepted. So that's the most important thing. And Kat, I'm forgetting the second one. My aging brain is attacking me right now.
That's fine. It's just, is there a particular OA license that you would recommend for an early career researcher?
Again, that comes down to your research project and what your preferences are. You know, if you're working with something that has commercial possibilities, or it really comes down to the project and kind of what your trying to think of the word here, you know, just what your desires are for how you want people to reuse your work. Some people really like a very restrictive one, just based on their, I can't think of an example right now, but based on the type of research. For instance, my partner, he tends to use very restricted CC licenses for he's an economist, a financial economist. So, you know, I think that is a reflection of the kind of work he's doing. So yeah, it depends. There's no best one. It's just what you feel is appropriate for your work and what you're trying to achieve.
Brilliant.
That was a very rambly answer, but hopefully I got there in the end.
Made sense to me.
Yeah. You're used to my rambling though. Great. Well, this looks great. Verification, validation, credibility. I think you nailed it on the head here with the importance of peer review. So thanks for participating in that. Back to our presentation here. All right. So peer review. So this is our final, one of the final sections here on peer review. And I want to start off by just talking about the types of peer review. And there are 3 types of peer review that you're likely to come across in your career. And the first one is called single anonymous. And this is where when the peer reviewer knows the identity of the author, but the author does not know the identity of the peer reviewer. And this is the most common type of peer review within science, technology, and medical fields. Now, the second one I've mentioned already, and that is double anonymous peer review. And this is where all identities are hidden. And this tends to be the most common within arts and humanities and the social sciences. However, as I've already indicated, it's fairly easy to discern the identity of the author if they have presented their work previously or if they're citing themselves extensively. So again, it's really important that if you're using double anonymous peer review, that you really anonymize at least one copy of your paper when you submit. And then lastly, there's open peer review, which is becoming increasingly popular. And this is where all identities are known. So keep in mind, there are many varieties of open peer review, from the basic where everyone's identity is known to a completely open process where the public can see the submitted version of the article, all of the peer reviewers and authors' comments, and the different versions of the paper. And I thought I would just show you what that looks like with an example from our F1000 platform. So for F1000, whenever a paper is submitted, it's checked by the in-house editorial team for suitability and eligibility. Assuming that the article has passed these criteria, it's sent to our typesetters and can be published online. So this is kind of different than traditional publishing. But at this point, the paper is published, but it's not yet peer reviewed. The published article is clearly marked as awaiting peer review, but it will be assigned a DOI and is immediately available to the wider community to be read and cited and is indexed in Google Scholar. Then after publication, the peer review stage is initiated. The reviewer reports are published online alongside the details of the reviewers' names and their affiliation. Because the article has already been published, the reviewers are asked only to focus on technical aspects and the soundness of the paper, rather than any subjective assessment of the novelty or contribution of the research. The reviewers provide a written report as well as selecting one of 3 statuses. So approved, approved with reservations, or not approved. Authors can then choose to revise their paper, addressing and responding to the reviewer comments, and with any new versions also being published and sent back to the reviewers if necessary for further comments. So in order for an article to pass peer review and to be sent to the relevant indexers and repositories, a paper either needs 2 approved statuses or 2 approved statuses. So 2 reviewers need to approve the paper, or it needs 1 approved and 2 approved with reservation statuses. And then once it has that, it's indexed with the key indexes there. Now, another model is transparent peer review. And in this model, the peer review reports are published along with the article as supplemental materials. However, the reviewer remains anonymous. Their name isn't listed on the report. And one of our journals practices this. This is the European Journal of Higher Education. So if you want to take a look at that, you can go check out some of the articles there. I think it's quite interesting to see. And the review reports tend to be very robust. Okay, so those are some of the different peer review models, but let's take a look at the typical peer review process and the most common types of decisions. So as an author, once you submit your paper to a journal, the editorial office will review your submission and decide whether they should send it out to the editor. If the submission has all the required elements, they'll send it to the editor. And then the editor will review the submission and decide whether to send it out to external peer reviewers. Now, if they do send it out, they will choose 2 or more external experts to assess the paper and provide a report with a recommendation for a decision. The editor will then read through the report and make a decision about the paper. Now, there are a few different decisions that can be made during the process, including rejection and acceptance. However, the most common decisions are desk rejection and revise and resubmit. So desk rejections occur before the paper is sent out to external peer reviewers. These decisions are usually made by the editor, and in some cases by the editorial office. And they're usually made within 1 to 2 days after the submission of the paper. Now, revise and resubmit decisions are made after the paper has been peer reviewed. And these decisions are based on the recommendations made by the peer reviewers, but it's always the editor's decision in the end. This decision means that the peer reviewer and the editors are interested in your work, but they feel that there are areas that could be improved upon. So revise and resubmit with major revisions means that there is something in your paper that the editor and peer reviewers find interesting. It could be the data that you're working with, your case study, your argument, your methodological framework, whatever. But it's still likely that you have quite a bit of work to do. It's not guaranteed that your article will be accepted. Revise and resubmit with minor revisions, which is sometimes called conditional acceptance, means that there are some small changes that need to be made, maybe additional citations, reformatting of a table, small things. Usually, if you address these changes in your changes sufficiently, your paper will be accepted. Now, once you finish your revisions, you will resubmit to the journal. The editor will then look at the new version and will possibly send it back out to the reviewers to see if they're happy with how you address their concerns. And that would be the case definitely with revise and resubmit with major revisions. Now, they may ask you to make some additional changes if they feel that you didn't address their original concerns sufficiently. And this can happen a couple of times with you making revisions and the reviewers asking you to try again. And the bad news is that this cycle can happen 2 to 3 times and your paper can be rejected in the end if the editor feels that you were not able to address the peer reviewer's concerns sufficiently. But I'll tell you how to avoid that situation in just a moment. Irrespective of what model of peer review you're dealing with, responding to the reviewer comments is a really important part of the process. At times when you receive the reviewer reports, it can feel like a rejection, especially with the revise and resubmit with major revisions. Try not to become upset, but if you are upset, just close your computer and forget about it for a couple of days. And when you're ready to get back to work, carefully read the decision letter. It may include some advice on how to respond to the reviewer comments, especially if the reviewers are suggesting kind of opposing things. And it will definitely provide information about deadlines for returning your revisions. Now, if you have co-authors, set up a meeting to review all of the reviewer comments and make certain to share the report with everyone prior to your meeting. And whether you have co-authors or not, you need to carefully go through those reviewer reports and make a list with every single one of their suggestions for improvement. You may want to group the comments based on category, for instance, all the comments about the literature review or method section, whatever works for you. The most important thing is that you capture each one of their suggestions. And then you want to go through that list and decide which recommendations you'd like to adopt and make those changes. Now, here's the key to avoiding the fate of going through the revisions process a couple of times and still being rejected. When you send back your revisions, you must include a note to the editor clearly detailing how you've addressed the peer reviewer's concerns, where you've adopted the peer reviewer's recommendations. You want to clearly detail what you have changed and where that change can be located in the paper. So be specific. You can say page and line number. Some journals welcome the use of track changes to help editors and peer reviewers see what you've done. You can maybe highlight sections, whatever. But the most important thing to remember is you still need that cover letter explaining what you've done. Now, you will not agree with all of the peer reviewers' recommendations. That's absolutely natural. In that case, in those cases, you need to clearly and respectfully explain why you chose not to amend your paper, why you chose not to make a change. And again, be very specific. So for instance, if the peer reviewer thought you should cite another paper, but you feel that it's out of scope of your project, explain why that is so that both the peer reviewer and the editor understand your logic. Now, once you've detailed how you've addressed each of the peer reviewers' comments, review your response to the editor, and make sure that you've included all the recommendations and actions that you've taken, and that you've done so in a very clear manner, and that the letter is professional and devoid of any frustration. This can be an incredibly challenging process, as I'm sure some of you know. So it's understandable that you may become a bit frustrated, maybe a little bit irritated with the peer reviewers, but it's just important that that doesn't influence how you're communicating with the editor. Most importantly, remember to be respectful and professional during this process. This is your community, your future network. You may end up submitting to the journal again. You may be asked to peer review articles. You maybe want to become a board member one day, or you may have dreams of collaborating with the individuals who are currently reviewing your paper. It's important to keep all of this in mind during the process. And remember, the editor and peer reviewers are trying to help you publish the very best version of your work. So don't take this personally. It's about how you're communicating your findings, not about you as a researcher. All right, finally, we have the production process, and you'll be happy to know there's just one slide here. This is a fairly straightforward process, and what's great is if you have any specific questions about the production process, Kat used to work in production, so she can answer those. So once the journal accepts your article, it will be automatically sent to the production department and assigned a DOI, which is a digital object identifier. At this point, the corresponding author will be the main point of contact for the production department. So that's on those co-authored papers. The corresponding author will sign all agreements on behalf of all of the authors. Again, if it's a co-authored paper. Once the agreements are signed, the paper will be sent to the copy editors and typesetters. They will make changes as need be. But it's important to remember, they will not do significant language editing. They will just make changes where there's an obvious issue. The assumption is that the paper is in good shape and ready to be published when it reaches the production department. Now, after they've finished, and that usually occurs within a week or so, sometimes a little bit longer, it just depends on what's going on, but usually within a week, the paper proofs will be returned to the corresponding author to review. At this point, no major changes should be made to the paper, just small edits. Authors can accept the changes that have been made and answer any queries that copy editors might have. If the copy editors have made a change that you don't agree with, you can note that in the proofs. Authors usually have about 3 days to review the proofs and then resubmit. It can be the case that there's a bit of back and forth at this stage, but it should be a fairly quick process. Now, once the proofs are ready, the article will then be published online. And at this point, the article will also be indexed with all the relevant databases. So PubMed, Web of Science, Crossref, DOAJ, all that kind of stuff. And that is my general overview of how the publishing process works. I appreciate it's a very wordy session, but I hope it was useful. And this is the first time we've run a session like this, so we really appreciate your feedback. You'll be receiving a request to fill out a survey after this, and any feedback would be much appreciated. And with that, I will stop sharing and answer any questions that you might have.
I'll just pause the recording here as well, if that's...
Yeah.
Yeah,